This week, we are going to explore collecting, analyzing, and feeding back data from our diagnosis of last week. In most cases of plan change, organizational development practitioners play an active role in gathering data from the organization and its members for the diagnostic purposes. There are four main ways of collecting data, including questionnaires, interviews, observations, and unobtrusive measures. Of course, there's pros and cons to all of these ways of collecting data. That's why it's important to use various methods of collecting data to avoid any potential biases. But let's start with questionnaires. Surveys and questionnaires, they can be an efficient way to collect data and may include standardized questions or customized questions. Responses can be quantified and summarized. Large samples and large quantities of data can be collected through these types of methods, and they're relatively inexpensive. Questionnaires can produce unreliable data, though, especially if respondents are not honest or if the questions asked elicit response bias. There's little opportunity for empathy with subjects or participants, and there's predetermined questions can lead to no change to change. Also, overinterpretation of data is possible, as well as that response bias that I mentioned. Interviews may be conducted on individuals or groups, and they may be highly structured or they can be flexible. Group interviews are often conducive to focus groups or a sensing meeting. They are very adaptive and they allow customization. It's a source of rich data, and it's a process that builds rapport and empathy with participants. A major drawback of interviews is the amount of time required to conduct and analyze them. They are relatively inexpensive. There can be biases in interview responses as well, and it can be difficult to code and interpret them. And then, of course, our self-report bias is also possible. The organizational development practitioner may simply observe and record the behaviors in their functional settings. Some advantages to this is that it collects data on actual behavior rather than reports of the behavior. It's real time, and it can be adaptive and objective. However, the potential problems could be that it's difficult to code and interpret, similar to what we saw in previous methods. Sampling can be inconsistent. Observers' bias and reliability can also be questioned, and it can be expensive because it can be time-consuming. Unobtrusive data are not collected directly from respondents, but from a secondary data source, such as company records or archives. For example, absenteeism, tardiness, grievances, meeting minutes, and things like that. Major advantages is that there's no biased responses. There is high face validity, and it's easily quantifiable. However, some potential problems might be privacy, and access to get this data might be difficult. There might be some validity concerns, and it could be difficult to code and interpret as well. Application of different data collection techniques raises questions about which data should be collected and how it should be collected. In some cases, sampling is not an issue because the OD practitioner collects data from all sources. In other words, instead of choosing a sample of the population of interest, the practitioner considers a census or the entire population. But in cases in which the practitioner chooses not to consider the entire data population, the sampling methods are relevant for ensuring data quality. Sampling involves deciding on the sample size and the sample selection method. Samples can be chosen using probability methods and non-probability methods. Though non-probability methods such as convenience are most common for qualitative data, probability methods are the only ones that can ensure the population of interest is reliably represented. Simple random sampling and stratified sampling are also addressed in your text. Data analysis techniques fall in two broad categories or classes, including qualitative and quantitative. Now, there are these two methods for analyzing qualitative data. Sorry, there are several, but the two that we use in OD are content analysis and force field analysis. Content analysis attempts to summarize comments into meaningful categories. It can reduce hundreds of interview comments into a few meaningful themes. The process involves three major steps. You read responses, generate themes that represent the comments, and categorize comments into the theme categories. Next, we have our force field analysis, which organizes information pertaining to the change into two major categories: forces for change and forces for maintaining status quo, like we talked about previously. The first step is to develop a list of all the forces promoting change and all the forces resisting change. One can rank or rate the strength of the different forces. Quantitative tools is the other classification. Methods of analyzing quantitative data or data with numbers range from simple descriptive statistics of items or scales from standard instruments to sophisticated multivariate analysis of the underlying instrument properties and relationships among measured variables. The most common measures might include descriptive statistics, measures of association such as correlation, and difference tests. The success of data feedback depends largely on its ability to arouse organizational action and to direct energy toward problem solving. Both the content and process of data feedback impact whether the organization will be energized to act. Effective feedback should have several characteristics. One, it must be relevant. It must be understandable, descriptive, verifiable, and timely. It must be limited, significant, comparative, and finalized.